The celestial drift was not, despite its poetic name, a pleasant place to visit. Built in the neutral zone between three major territorial powers, it served as a diplomatic hub where species who would otherwise happily vaporize each other's planets gathered to discuss trade agreements over cocktails that could dissolve titanium. The station rotated slowly through the void, its architecture a chaotic mashup of 17 different construction philosophies, none of which had bothered to communicate with the others. Somewhere between the crystalline spires of Section 9 and the bioluminescent tunnels of the aquatic quarter, tucked into a reinforced chamber that had seen more violence than a war zone and more betting than a casino, sat the arbitration sphere. This was where civilized beings settled their differences through the ancient and honored tradition of beating the absolute hell out of each other, while others watched and wagered absurd amounts of currency. Commander Drax Kor of the Vrellan Imperial Guard stood at the edge of the combat zone. And if his species had invented the concept of smugness, they would have named it after him. 8 feet of scaled muscle, 4 arms ending in claws that could shred duraplast, a tail thick enough to be used as a battering ram, and a hide that had evolved on a world where acid rain was considered light weather. The Vrellans had conquered 47 systems through a combination of superior technology and the fact that most species took one look at them and decided that surrender was a reasonable life choice. Drax Kor had personally won 163 sanctioned combat challenges across the known galaxy. His people didn't just fight well. They had made warfare into a religion, combat into poetry, and defeating lesser species into a casual hobby. Today's opponent was, to put it charitably, not impressive. The human female stood maybe 5.5 feet tall, give or take whatever Earth's bizarre measurement system called inches. She wore standard station-issue combat gear that hung slightly loose on her frame, suggesting she had grabbed it from the general supply locker rather than having anything custom-fitted. Her hair was pulled back in a simple tail, dark brown and completely unremarkable. No visible cybernetic enhancements, no biomodifications, no tactical implants that Drax Kor could detect with his enhanced sensory array. Her name was Mika Okonkwo, and she stretched her neck with a series of pops that made the Threlian observer in the front row wince visibly. The observation gallery was packed to capacity, which meant approximately 400 beings from 60 different species were crammed into a space designed for 300, all of them vibrating with anticipation. The air hummed with translator devices working overtime, converting excitement into 60 different linguistic and chemical formats. In the VIP section, where the serious money changed hands, a group of Vrellanj dignitaries sat in poses that radiated absolute confidence. They had bet heavily on their champion. Across from them, a delegation of humans occupied a much smaller space, looking far too relaxed for people about to watch one of their own get dismantled. Between them, representatives from 24 other species placed bets with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for religious festivals. The odds heavily favored Drax Kor, something like 90-1 against the human, which would have been insulting if anyone thought she had an actual chance. The Quillian bookmaker, a floating jellyfish-like creature who processed mathematics faster than most ship computers, pulsed with colors indicating extreme satisfaction with the betting volume. This fight had generated more action than the last 6 combined. Drax Kor cracked his knuckles, all 16 of them, creating a sound like a percussion instrument having an argument with itself. He had studied the basic xenobiology reports on humans during the transport to Celestial Drift. Fascinating species, really. They had achieved spaceflight despite having no natural advantages whatsoever. No claws, no venom, no armored skin, no redundant organs. Their homeworld was barely classified as challenging, sitting in the comfortable middle zone of gravity and atmosphere that produced soft, weak species. The reports noted that humans had unusual endurance for their size and an oddly high pain tolerance. But these were curiosities, not combat advantages. They were diplomats, traders, explorers, not warriors. This fight existed because of a diplomatic reception 3 days prior. One of those tedious affairs where species pretended to like each other while maneuvering for economic advantages. Drax Kor had been holding court near the buffet table, regaling a group of admirers with tales of his victories, when the subject of human fragility came up. "They break so easily," he had said, sampling something that tasted like spiced metal. "I have seen the anatomical scans. Their bones are hollow, practically. Their skin tears from minor impacts. They have one heart, one liver, one brain. Catastrophic design flaws." A human trade representative, this Mika person, had been standing nearby. She had turned with a smile that should have been a warning, but registered as mere politeness. "Hollow bones are actually just for birds," she had said pleasantly. "Our bones are solid. Well, mostly solid. There is some spongy stuff in the middle, but it is pretty hard to break them." "Semantics." Drax Kor had waved a dismissive claw. "The point stands. Humans are structurally inferior. It is simply biology. Want to test that theory?" The room had gone quiet in the way rooms do when someone says something profoundly stupid or profoundly brave, and the audience hasn't yet determined which. "You are challenging me to combat?" Drax Kor had laughed, a sound like rocks in a gravel crusher. "You cannot be serious." "Completely serious. Standard arbitration sphere rules. No weapons, no modifications, winner by knockout or submission." She had sipped her drink, something blue that definitely wasn't from Earth. "Unless you would rather just admit you are making assumptions based on incomplete data." Pride was a funny thing. It made civilizations reach for the stars. It also made individuals accept challenges from opponents they could crush without effort, just to prove a point. "Very well," Drax Kor had said. 3 days from now, I will try not to permanently injure you." "Appreciate that," Mika had said, and her smile hadn't changed at all. Now, standing in the arbitration sphere with hundreds of eyes and optical sensors focused on them, Drax Kor felt the same comfortable confidence he felt before every fight. This would be educational for the human, a learning experience about the realities of galactic hierarchy and the importance of knowing one's limitations. The Arbiter, a crystalline being who existed partially out of phase with standard reality and found physical violence both fascinating and incomprehensible, manifested in the center of the combat zone. "Combatants," it chimed, its voice translating as pure mathematical concepts that everyone's brains helpfully converted to language. "You have agreed to standard arbitration rules. No lethal force. No permanent maiming. Fight ends on knockout, submission, or medical intervention. Energy barriers will contain the combat zone. Medical drones are standing by. Do you understand these terms?" "Understood," Drax Kor rumbled. "Crystal clear," Mika said. "Then let us begin whenever you achieve mutual readiness for violence." The Arbiter phased out, leaving them alone in the sphere. Energy barriers hummed to life, containing the fighting space in a dome of hard light that could withstand starship weapons. Probably overkill for this match. But regulations were regulations. Drax Kor dropped into a combat stance, weight distributed across all 4 limbs, tail coiled for balance or striking. The fighting claw position, classic Vrellan technique, devastating against opponents of any size. Mika rolled her shoulders, bounced lightly on her feet, and raised her hands in a guard position that looked almost casual. The crowd leaned forward collectively, And somewhere in the betting section, last-minute wagers flew at speeds that violated several laws of physics. Drax Core struck first, because he always struck first. The opening move of the claw was a four-limbed assault, each hand targeting different zones, creating a web of attacks impossible to fully defend against. He had used this technique to defeat a Thork war champion twice his size. It had never failed. Mika wasn't where his strikes landed. She had moved, not away but sideways, a sliding step that took her outside his attack pattern by margins so small they barely qualified as margins. His claws hit air, and before he could reset, she had jabbed him in the side, just below his lower right arm. The hit was light, barely worth noticing. Drax Core ignored it and pressed forward, because momentum was key in Vrelin combat doctrine. He threw a combination with his upper arms, feinted with his lower left, and lashed out with his tail, a three-vector attack that should have been impossible to avoid in the confined space. Mika ducked the arms, sidestepped the tail, and hit him again, this time in the back of his knee. Again, not a powerful strike, but placed with precision that suggested she knew exactly where she was aiming. The observation gallery was making noises now, murmurs of confusion and surprise filtering through translation systems. Drax Core reassessed slightly. Fast. The human was faster than expected, but speed alone meant nothing against superior strength and reach. He just needed to connect solidly once, and this would be over. He feinted high with both right arms, then swept low with his left, a technique designed to catch dodging opponents. His claws found fabric, caught the edge of Mika's sleeve, but she had already twisted away, sacrificing the cloth to avoid the grab. Her counter was a kick to his extended elbow, angled precisely to hyperextend the joint. Pain flared, sharp and unexpected. Drax Core pulled back, protective instincts overriding aggression for a moment. In that moment, Mika hit him 4 more times. Ribs, shoulder, neck, kidney. Each strike targeted, each one finding soft tissue between armored scales. What in the name of the void was happening? The crowd was no longer murmuring. They were shouting, the sound building like a wave. In the betting section, the Quillian bookmaker pulsed colors indicating mathematical impossibility. Drax Core abandoned technique and went for raw power. He charged, all 4 arms spreading wide to prevent escape, intending to simply grab the human and throw her into the barrier, hard enough to end this embarrassment. Mika did something with her footwork that seemed to violate conservation of momentum. And suddenly, she was inside his guard, too close for him to effectively grab. Her elbow found his sternum, the one spot where Vrelin's scales were thinnest, and the impact drove air from his lungs in a whoosh that the translator rendered a surprised wheezing. Then she hooked his ankle with her foot, pushed his chest with her other hand, and used his own charging momentum to send him crashing to the ground. The arbitration sphere's floor was reinforced the composite designed to handle impacts from species that weighed several tons. It handled Drax Core's fall just fine. His dignity was less durable. He rolled to his feet, now breathing hard, and the cold realization hit him harder than any of her strikes. She had been studying Vrelin anatomy. Those precise hits to nerve clusters, the knowledge of where scales were weakest, the targeting of specific joints. This wasn't luck. This was preparation. The human had done her homework. In the observation gallery, the human delegation was laughing. Not mocking laughter, but the kind of laughter that came from watching something unfold exactly as predicted. The Vrelin dignitaries had stopped looking smug and started looking concerned. Drax Core changed strategies. Fine. She wanted to be technical, surgical. He would overwhelm her with volume. He launched into the typhoon form, a continuous assault that sacrificed defense for pure offensive pressure. 4 arms became a blur. Strikes coming from every angle, never stopping, never giving the opponent space to think or counter. It was exhausting. It was also usually decisive. Mika flowed through the assault like water finding cracks in stone. She blocked what she couldn't avoid, avoided what she couldn't block, and the few strikes that landed clean were absorbed and used to create distance or angles for her counters. And she kept hitting back, kept targeting those same spots, building damage incrementally. His upper right elbow was swelling. His left knee was beginning to buckle on weight shifts. His ribs on the right side sent sharp complaints with every deep breath. None of the injuries were serious. That wasn't the point. She was dismantling his ability to fight effectively, one carefully calculated strike at a time. 30 seconds of the typhoon form was usually enough to end fights. Drax's core had been going for 2 minutes, and the human was still standing, still moving, still countering. His arms were getting heavy. His breathing was labored. How was he getting tired? Vrelins had cardiovascular systems designed for sustained combat. He could fight for hours without fatigue. Except he had been fighting at maximum intensity, wasting energy on attacks that didn't land, while the human moved with minimal effort, conserving everything, wasting nothing. The arbitration sphere's chronometer showed 3 minutes elapsed. Drax's core had never fought for 3 minutes. His matches ended in under 1, usually. He needed to end this. 1 solid grab, 1 good throw. That's all it would take. Mika seemed to read his intention, because she changed tactics too. She stopped circling and came straight at him, aggressive for the first time in the fight. She threw a combination at his head, forcing his upper arms up to block, then dropped low and swept his legs with a movement that belonged to no Vrelin combat database. He went down again, this time less gracefully. His tail scraped against the floor, his back hit hard, and before he could react, the human was on him. She had his upper right arm locked in some kind of joint manipulation that sent pain screaming through his shoulder. His lower arms tried to grab her, but she had positioned herself at an angle where his leverage was terrible. Her legs were doing something complicated with his lower body that prevented him from rolling or generating the power to throw her off. Drax's core thrashed, using pure strength to try to break the hold. The human adjusted her position slightly, and the pressure on his shoulder joint increased to the point where continuing to struggle meant risking actual damage. "Yield?" Mika said calmly, not even breathing hard. "Or I hyperextend this joint and you spend 2 weeks in medical." Pride warred with pragmatism. Pride was very loud, very insistent. Pragmatism pointed out that his shoulder was making sounds joints should not make. He started, then stopped because admitting defeat hurt worse than the joint lock. The human increased pressure slightly. The pain clarified his priorities wonderfully. "I yield," Drax's core gasped, and the words tasted like ashes and humiliation. Mika released the hold immediately and rolled away, coming to her feet in a smooth motion. She offered a hand to help him up, which was either generous or the most devastating insult imaginable. Drax's core stared at the offered hand for a moment, then accepted it, letting her help pull him to his feet despite the fact that she probably weighed a third of what he did. The observation gallery had gone completely insane. Beings were making their species equivalent of shocked sounds in 60 different formats. Credits were changing hands so fast, the Quillian bookmakers' color shifting couldn't keep up. The human delegation was on their feet cheering. The Vrelin dignitaries looked like they had just watched their fundamental understanding of the universe collapse. The arbiter phased back into reality, chiming with tones that suggested it found this outcome statistically fascinating. "Victory to the human, Mika Okonkwo, by submission," it announced. Combat duration: 4 minutes and 17 seconds. Medical drones will now attend to injuries. Drax Kor stood there, dripping sweat and trying to process what had happened. His shoulder throbbed. His knee was angry. His ribs had filed formal complaints with his nervous system. "Good fight," Mika said, extending her hand again, this time for a shake. Drax Kor took it automatically, his brain still catching up to current events. Her grip was firm but not challenging, professional rather than gloating. "How?" he asked, because he needed to understand. "You are smaller, lighter, structurally weaker." "Yeah, we get that a lot," Mika said, releasing his hand. "Turns out when you spend your entire evolutionary history being the weakest thing in your environment, you get really, really good at fighting things bigger and stronger than you. Also, I have a 3rd-degree black belt in judo, trained in Muay Thai for 6 years, and spent the last 3 months studying Vrelin combat techniques and anatomy." 3 months, Drax Kor repeated numbly. "Your people's martial arts academy streams training videos publicly. Very educational." She grinned. "Appreciate the overconfidence, though. Made my job easier." The medical drones arrived, hovering around Drax Kor with scanners extended. One of them chimed helpfully to inform him that he had suffered no permanent damage but should avoid strenuous combat for approximately 2 weeks. 2 weeks. He would need 2 weeks to recover from a fight with a human who looked like she could be knocked over by a strong breeze. The energy barriers dropped, and beings began filtering out of the observation gallery, most of them loudly discussing what they had just witnessed. The Quillian bookmaker was surrounded by winners collecting their earnings and losers demanding recounts. In the VIP section, the lead Vrelin dignitary approached, his expression carefully neutral in the way that indicated internal screaming. "Commander Drax Kor," he said formally. "That was educational." "Ambassador Trelvox?" Drax Kor acknowledged, trying to salvage whatever dignity remained. "I apologize for the loss. I underestimated the opponent." "Clearly." The ambassador paused. "The human delegation has requested a meeting. They wish to discuss cross-training opportunities, cultural exchange of combat techniques." Of course they did. Drax Kor looked across the sphere to where Mika was being congratulated by her fellow humans, who apparently had never doubted the outcome for a second. She caught his gaze and gave a small nod of acknowledgement, respectful but not pitying. "I will attend the meeting," Drax Kor said. Because pride was useful in combat, but lethal in learning, and he had just received a lesson he would never forget. 3 hours later, Drax Kor lay in a medical pod, while nanites repaired strained ligaments and reduced swelling in his joints. The pod's systems offered him recreational media to pass the time. He ignored them and instead requested all available documentation on human martial arts, human military history, and human approaches to asymmetric warfare. The database returned approximately 40,000 documents. He settled in to start reading, because if he was going to lose the rematch, and Mika had already mentioned a rematch with that same pleasant smile, he wanted it to at least take 6 minutes. The viewing screen above his medical pod showed the fight footage on repeat, because apparently the entire station was now obsessed with watching a Vrelin Imperial Guard commander get systematically dismantled by someone half his size. Social networks across 6 sectors were sharing it. Military analysts from a dozen species were breaking down the techniques. 3 different combat academies had already reached out to request Mika as a guest instructor. Drax Kor watched himself charge confidently into disaster, and with the clarity of hindsight, saw all the warnings he had ignored. The way she had accepted the challenge too easily. The relaxed confidence of the human delegation. The fact that the smartest species in the galaxy, the ones who made their living calculating probabilities, had bet heavily against him. All the signs had been there. He had simply assumed his advantages were insurmountable. Humanity, he was learning, had built their entire civilization on the principle that her disadvantages were just problems waiting for creative solutions. They were weaker. They learned leverage and technique. They were slower. They studied patterns and predicted movements. They were outnumbered. They cooperated and adapted. They had crawled their way to the top of their planet's food chain despite having every reason to go extinct. And they had done it by being stubborn, clever, and absolutely refusing to accept that the universe's rules applied to them the same way they applied to everyone else. And now they were here, in the galaxy, still refusing to read the script everyone else followed. The medical pod chimed to indicate his treatment was 30% complete. Drax Core pulled up the first document in the Human Martial Arts database and began reading about something called Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which apparently was specifically designed for smaller, weaker practitioners to defeat larger, stronger opponents. Of course it was. In the station's recreation district, Mika sat in a human-friendly bar called The Watering Hole, surrounded by her delegation and several new friends from species who appreciated the finer points of watching assumptions get violently corrected. "The look on his face," said Marcus Chen, the trade delegation's lead negotiator, wiping tears from his eyes. "When you got that armbar locked in, I have never seen someone so confused about basic physics." "To be fair," Mika said, nursing something that approximated beer if beer was made by aliens who had only heard beer described once. "He fought well. Good technique, excellent instincts. He just didn't expect anyone to specifically train to counter Vrellan combat styles. Because that would require someone to take humans seriously as physical threats," added Jennifer Okafor, the delegation's xenoanthropologist. "Which nobody does until we prove otherwise." A Vryn floated over to their table, its bioluminescent patterns pulsing with satisfaction. "Excellent performance, human Mika. My people won substantial credits betting on your victory. We wish to express our gratitude by purchasing your next beverage." "Appreciate it," Mika said. "What made you bet on me?" The odds were terrible. "Pattern recognition," the Vryn pulsed. "We analyzed 237 previous human combat encounters across galactic history. Humans rarely accept fights they cannot win. When a human agrees to combat against a physically superior opponent, it indicates preparation and confidence. The Vrellan's arrogance indicated lack of preparation. Mathematics dictated the outcome." "Glad someone did the math," Mika said, raising her glass in salute. The Vryn pulsed acknowledgement and floated away to collect more winnings. "So," Marcus said, leaning forward conspiratorially. "Rematch?" "Oh, definitely," Mika said. "But next time he will have studied human fighting styles. It will be much harder." "You say that like you are looking forward to it." "I am. Fighting someone who underestimates you is easy. Fighting someone who has done their homework and still wants the match?" She grinned. "That is when it gets interesting." Jennifer laughed. "You know what the best part of this is? Every species on this station just learned that humans are not to be dismissed. Diplomatic negotiations are going to be very different from now on." "That was kind of the point," Marcus said. "Sometimes the best trade agreement comes after you have punched someone in the face, metaphorically, or in this case, literally." They clinked glasses, toasting to successful diplomacy through superior application of joint logs. Across the station, in a dozen different quarters and 100 different conversations, The galaxy was slowly adjusting to a new reality. The humans were no longer the amusing newcomers, the soft species who had stumbled into the cosmos and would need protecting from its harsher elements. They were survivors, adapters, students of violence who treated every disadvantage as a puzzle to be solved. They were the species who had looked at the predators of their world and decided that being prey was optional. And now they were here, among the stars, still refusing to stay down, still finding ways to win fights they had no business winning. The celestial drift rotated slowly through the void, its lights gleaming against the darkness. And if you listened carefully, you could hear the sound of fundamental assumptions being revised at speed. Drax Kor finished his first document on human martial arts and moved to the second, taking notes with the dedication of someone who had just learned a very expensive lesson. His shoulder throbbed in time with his reading, a physical reminder that pride and preparation rarely occupied the same space. He had challenged the human girl to combat, expecting an easy victory and a good story. Instead, he had woken up asking who won, and learned that sometimes the scariest question was not whether you could win, but whether you had bothered to find out if you could lose. The answer, as 4 minutes and 17 seconds of footage would forever remind him, was yes.